Hello, I'm Bonnie Maslow, and today I'd like to speak with you about intellectual freedom and the digital divide. You know, access to computers and the internet have become increasingly important for individuals. It allows them to participate in all types of political, social, educational, and different aspects of life, not only in the United States, but all through the world. And there is a gap, however, between some people, and this is often referred to as the digital divide, and that's what we're going to speak about today. First, I'd like to address a couple of the foundations of freedom, the First and the Fourth Amendment uh, to the Constitution of the United States. Very important freedoms. The First Amendment, of course, addresses our freedom of speech, our freedom to express ourselves, among many other things. And then, of course, the Fourth Amendment, which addresses the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects. And now that we are in the digital age, there are currently questions about the right of the people to be secure online and in the library. So both of these are extremely important elements to the foundations for intellectual freedom in the library environment. Why is intellectual freedom important? Well, it's important so that we can have the freedom to pursue ideas. The Library Bill of Rights is a document that was first adopted by the American Library Association in 1939, and it serves as an interpretation of the First Amendment of the Constitution of the United States as it applies to the library environment. And a history of the Library Bill of Rights can be found in the American Library Association Intellectual Freedom Manual. Some important foundations of freedom in the library environment and intellectually are the ALA Intellectual Freedom Manual, the ALA Library Bill of Rights, the ALA Freedom to Read Statement, the ALA Code of Ethics, the ALA Office for Information Technology Policy, and I'd like to share their mission statement with you next. The OITP mission states as follows: the Office for Information Technology Policy advances ALA's public policy activities by helping secure information technology policies that support and encourage efforts of libraries to ensure access to electronic information resources as a means of upholding the public's right to a free and open information society. It works to ensure a library voice in information policy debates and to promote full and equitable intellectual participation by the public. There have always been challenges to intellectual freedom throughout history, and they continue to this day. Historically, methods of censorship in the past have included legal, administrative, violence, economic measures, and again, those methods of censorship still exist in today's world. Challenges to these intellectual freedoms of people continues, and it is a core tenet of the library profession. So some digital challenges to intellectual freedom include filters and labeling, federal funding, copyright and fair use doctrine, privacy and confidentiality, net neutrality, national security, things such as the Patriot Act, and of course restriction to access. So for example, filters and labeling might be paired with federal funding. As we learned in our class, some schools may not receive federal funding unless they have filters on their computers, so that's something that's important. Net neutrality, you might not know what that means, but net neutrality is the current debate going on in the digital world between methods of access to the internet. For example, why do some people have cable and DSL and some people have broadband, and how does that affect people? Well, common carrier laws that govern phone lines used to govern dial-up access, but now customers that receive broadband service over other technologies, they're not subject to the same common carriage requirements. So with these technologies comes superior access to dial-up, and many people feel that that offers a non-neutral aspect because some people cannot simply afford that. So we've moved on into this new debate of regulation and competition. The Library Bill of Rights affirms that libraries should be spaces of free ideas, intellectual inquiry, and provide equitable access to information for all. And that's a wonderful thing. It might have been a little bit easier or less involved when people were just going into the library to read print materials, but equitable access now means access to computers and access to the internet so that you can participate and intellectual inquiry. So these are principles of a free society. They're principles of a democratic society. And equal access to information includes digital access. The digital divide presents an inequity of access to information, and that's what many people are working toward, or that divide. Digital divide itself is a term that was first used in 1996, and Merriam-Webster's dictionary defined it as the economic, educational, and social inequalities between those who have computers and online access and those who do not. Many of the people historically who have been affected by the digital divide include those lower income individuals, individuals from rural areas, the elderly, and individuals with disabilities. And other factors studies have shown have included racial components and educational levels. Some of the factors and the challenges people face are lack of computer, a laptop, lack of a tablet, lack of computer access in general, lack of internet access. If you're in a rural area, there may not be any internet access, lack of broadband accessibility, lack of digital literacy. This falls into the educational problem and possibly age or disabilities. The lack of website interoperability with assistive technologies. And then, of course, there's digital complacency, which can come from a number of external factors such as computer anxiety and whatnot. Falling Through the Net, that was the name of the first high profile study of the technological have and have nots, as they were dubbed back in the 90s. And it was initiated in 1994 by the National Telecommunications and Information Administration, or the NTIA. And research findings demonstrated that income and geographical location, age, and education were all top predictors of who, at that time, would have a telephone or a computer in their household. In 1995, a follow-up report suggested that the traditional providers of access to information would play a very important role in the electronic age. And that was kind of an informal call out to schools and libraries because, of course, they were the traditional providers of access to information. This created a burden of expense due to the cost of computer purchases and maintenance. So, but it also demonstrated the need for libraries and schools as information hubs in the community, demonstrated how important they were to the community, particularly for those affected by the divide the most. In 1999, a follow-up survey was done by the NTIA, and it showed that there was a large increase in computer ownership and internet access. However, gaps still existed in segments of society, and at that time, education and income seemed to be leading factors in the digital divide. And another finding was simply that people did not want to pay the high cost of the internet, or perhaps they couldn't afford to pay the high cost of the internet. So the results from these two surveys that they had prompted the government to take some actions. The Telecom Act, or Telecommunications Act of 1996, directed the FCC to implement a funding mechanism for schools and libraries, and that project became known as E-rate, and it is funded by the Universal Service Fund. E-rate provides telecommunications services, internet access, and equipment to deliver services or internal connections to eligible libraries and schools. However, there are many other aspects involved financially with these programs that E-rate does not cover, such as computer upgrades, hardware, and other services. It also does not cover personal computers, And many citizens who are still not opting into technology are citing it's the high cost of computers or the high cost of internet access that is still prohibiting them from becoming participants in technology. What happened after that were private stakeholders stepped up to the plate. Bill and Melinda Gates, their foundation, committed more than $250 million in equipment and provided training. And other stakeholders, to mention just a few, were huge companies such as Kellogg, AT&T, the Boys and Girls Clubs of America. And those fine institutions also provided funding to help these public locations. Uh, the 2012 census and a 2013 forum, it showed that the gap had narrowed significantly for many, and a lot of this has to do with the surge of ownership in cellular phones and smartphones. So many people who did not have access to computers or laptops or whatnot did have a cell phone. So therefore, they connected to the internet, connected to social media, and did things like that through their cell phone. So that did help change the demographics and the dynamics a bit in the divide. The U.S. Census Bureau, this is the result of their study that showed in 2012 that only 25.2% of households did not have the internet. And it broke down this way, where 12.2% did not want it, 7.3% thought it was too expensive, 2.8% did not have a computer or they had an inadequate computer, and 2.9% did not participate for no given reason. So having a computer, having a device, those gaps had closed a little bit, but now the topic and the debate has changed from owning a device to having broadband accessibility. So for many, the cost of broadband accessibility is still prohibitive. These individuals now need libraries and community access centers more than ever, because obviously if they now have a device but they can't afford to connect that device, they'll go to the library and use the library's free Wi-Fi function if they have their own device, or they will go and use the library computers because they cannot afford access to the internet on their own. And library technology patrons use library computers or their free Wi-Fi for many different purposes. Educational purposes, they complete job applications, post resumes, they find important government information they may need, perhaps tax information. They can also read the news in their community, and it allows them to maintain social contacts with relatives or through social media sites such as Facebook, Twitter, and the like. There are still digital inclusion gaps because digital literacy skills for many are still lacking, and they can include lower socioeconomic groups. They still seem to be at a digital disadvantage. And there's lack of web interoperability with assistive technology users, so that can create an inclusion gap. The demand for public computers can often exceed the available equipment, meaning long wait times in lower income communities where resources are slim. So poverty and disability create this interrelated vicious cycle. Information and communication technologies have frequently neglected individuals with disabilities. Now this group has a much lower technology rate than the rest of the population, and studies have shown that there's a huge aging population, and that alone is going to result in an increase in the number of people through virtually age with disabilities over the next 20 years. We need to get these people connected because the benefits to individuals with disabilities and to seniors is incalculable. It can decrease medical costs, it can lower the cost of institutionalized living, it can give them output in the labor force and in the community, it can eliminate daily living communication barriers for these folks, and also it can certainly increase their socialization with others. Well, some barriers for individuals with disabilities. Information and communication technology assistive equipment is more expensive. So, some of these barriers, I've just touched base on a couple of them here. They can include the need for acoustic amplification devices. Micro keyboards can present a problem for individuals with tactile disabilities. Fixed font sizes or colors, things of that nature, can present problems to the visually impaired. As an example, there are gaps at times for technologies that convert text to audio that can create problems. And certainly, last but not least, is the fear of social stigma that can be associated with disability. It should not be, but unfortunately, it can be. So, lack of interest and low motivation for individuals with disabilities and seniors can be due to a few other factors: computer anxiety, intimidation by technology, and fear that they'll break the technology they're trying to learn. And this comes from not having access to these devices. So, these negative feelings, they can be related to educational attainment and age. If you have not been exposed to something, you can be very wary of it. It can give you anxiety, and while you're learning it, of course, if you're in a public place, certainly you might have a fear of, damaging something because you're so unfamiliar with it. So these are gaps that need to be bridged. Information and communication technology, access to computers, the internet, it offers tremendous personal, professional, community, and general social empowerment potential. Um, but we must use a multidimensional approach to bridge the metaphorical divide. It has to be utilized because there are so many different aspects right now to this debate of how to bridge the digital divide. There is not one approach, but by using information access, the use and sharing of information, and information dissemination on topics about the divide and intellectual freedom, we can certainly further work toward bridging some of these gaps in society. The library is helping, and it can continue to help. It's a very important community resource. It provides free computer and Wi-Fi access, trains patrons in a safe internet and computer use, and the library can also provide training for patrons on how to use important databases and other important electronic information resources. And let's not forget showing patrons how to use social resources. Social networking has become a huge way to stay in touch. And this is important for people as well, not only for professional purposes, but recreational purposes. You have to have a break sometimes. So, the library, by providing diverse electronic materials and promoting multi generational information literacy, can be a wonderful resource to everyone. The library can also continue to strive toward adding assistive technologies for individuals with disabilities to their library. If the personal, not the personal, but the local library budget is what I was trying to think of, does not have the funding for assistive devices, they certainly have the resources to statewide and some federal programs that can certainly help their patrons have access to information and equity of service and access. By practicing and maintaining the principles of intellectual freedom, we can always work toward bridging the divide, because until everyone is connected, until everyone has access to this knowledge, there will be some who will lack the intellectual freedom that others enjoy. By practicing and maintaining patron privacy and confidentiality, this is important policies for library patrons as well as library employees. It's very important, especially with the internet and computers, that people learn about privacy and confidentiality and honor those principles. And then, of course, by providing information services that represent various ideas in various formats by a diverse population, this also helps to bridge the intellectual divide. Therefore, the library provides a bridge in a knowledge-based society, and the public library is committed to equity of access, and it's vital to knowledge-based communities and a knowledge-based society. So I hope that you've enjoyed this lecture, and I thank you for listening. So I'd like to close this out with some discussion questions and get your point of view. Number one, why worry about the digital divide? If it's not impacting you, why should you worry about it? How do you feel it's impacting society? Let me hear your thoughts on that. Question number two, I read an article in The Hill online, and it stated that as many as 89% of Native American libraries do not have broadband access. So I was wondering if some of you could name other groups who similarly face barriers to intellectual freedom and access to information, either via computer barriers or internet barriers. And question three, do you think that online access should cost the same regardless of the information you seek? This has to do with the issue of net neutrality that I just basically touched on. Why does it cost different amounts of money depending on what you want to look at? Why does it cost more if you want a faster connection? So that's something to think about. Again, thanks for listening, and I hope you've enjoyed this.